Today we're going to talk a little bit about the journey that I and my company have made from moving from DITA to a Confluence-based wiki to move to a full DocOps process. And we're going to talk a little bit about the fantastic concepts in DITA and the terrible tools that come with it. So a little bit about me. My name is Matt Reiner. I am a content strategist at a company called NimbleUser. We're based in Rochester, New York. And we write a software application called NimbleAMS. So a good example of what NimbleAMS is for is if you registered for Tekom and you went through an event registration process, that is part of an association management system because Tekom is an association. And NimbleAMS does that kind of stuff. There's event registration, membership management, subscription management, the kind of things that associations need to do with their members. And we build it on the Salesforce platform because a huge differentiator for us from our competitors is we're using modern technology. Our competitors are using very, very old technology that they're trying to make look pretty. Instead, we're working on a multi-tenant software as a service system delivering truly innovative solutions. And we think that's pretty cool. That coupled with great service and a good culture. So that's me. That's NimbleAMS. And so today, we're going to talk just a little bit about wasting time and how we found DITA concepts are great, but we're just wasting our life away waiting for DITA to do its thing. I'm going to talk a little bit about when we recognized it was time to switch and the scary move that we made from DITA to something else. I'm going to talk a little bit about where that move has positioned NimbleUser and how we can now move forward. And then I'm going to take your questions, which I'm really excited to get. So first, let's take a little trip back to 2013. It's hard to believe that's 5 years ago already. But in 2013, we started in earnest working on NimbleAMS. And we started as most technical writers do, or teams do, first without a technical writer and also in Microsoft Word. So, you know, every user manual has to start somewhere, and ours was written over nights and weekends to try and get our first app sort of out the door. And it was written on Word documents and then physically printed out and bound up and handed to our customer. And it worked really well for that first release. It always does. But then it turns out we have 3 releases a year, and they're delivered over the internet. And we have a growing number of customers. So that would mean we would have to print out and hand deliver manuals 3 times a year, which would actually go up out of date even anytime we would patch or improve something in production because they would have a paper manual that didn't update when the software did. So we looked at Salesforce, right? We're on the Salesforce platform, and Salesforce was using a tool called DITA, right? And DITA is this sort of standard based on XML, but it supports some really, really healthy concepts and habits that have been developed, really based on learning theory from back in the 50s and further back even. But DITA was established in 2001 officially as an open source standard. And it really promotes the idea of grouping or creating small chunks of content that you can group together in different ways. And they call that structuring. You structure the content. There's other things called DITA maps where you put documents together, and then you put you further structure the data within those documents as smaller chunks, and you can reuse that content in many different ways. And those are beautiful concepts because rather than writing in Word, which first of all is terrible, but second of all is not reusable and very difficult if you have more than one person writing on it or more than one version, which any software should have more than one version. So DITA sort of solved all those things, and it was fantastic, and we were really excited. We're doing things the right way, right, as technical writers ought to do. But we found there were some headaches with DITA, and they were surmountable at first, but it became just impossible there near the end. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and if you have ever worked with DITA, these may sound familiar. So first, when it came to authoring, we were versioning in Git. Who here is familiar with Git? Oh, that's good. All right. Git, I believe it's agreed in the community, Git is sort of the best way to version DITA content. If you are a software developer, you'll know that Git was developed by the founder of, or not founder, but conceiver of Linux, and it was used to manage that project, and it's a very delightfully simple yet very powerful source control agent. It is not delightfully simple for a technical writer who ought not deal with such things. It should be very easy to manage versions, and instead you have to use special tools or the command line issuing certain commands to create branches, which are sort of a new version or subversion of your content, and then commit those branches, which is sort of a way of getting that content to a state where it could be published, and then doing merging, which is sort of a way of saying, yes, this should go in my new version. There's a lot more to it, but that's what versioning in Git looks like, and it's not great for technical writers. Even with certain automations, there's a lot of ugliness to that process. And so just working with Git was an incredible headache. I can't tell you how many times as a technical writer I had to talk to my build engineer and say, Ted, I think I did something wrong. Something is not working. I tried to commit this, but this happened. I don't, and this is after reading all the documentation on Git. I still was struggling with that. So I was trying to write useful content, and instead I was fighting against Git. There are some very complicated editors out there. So because DITA is based on XML, you can do lots and lots of things with it. But in order to do those things, you have to have lots and lots of controls. And then often those controls don't work, and then you have to get into even uglier things. There are some simplified ones that we tried, but we were finding they just didn't meet the needs we had. And so you're dealing with these horrible editors that distract you from authoring the useful content that you're trying to author. A really good example that I kept coming across was bulleted lists. I would start making a bullet. Bullet 1 looked OK. Bullet 2 looked OK. Bullet 3, what's happening there? Bullet 3, what's going on with bullet 3? And then, of course, you have to jump into the XML. And you get into the XML, and well, then you realize the XML is screwed up. And I'll talk about that in a minute, because that is just such a painful thing. But the editors don't help with that. And this is an industry where, so this was open source in 2001, so we're talking about 16 years now. They've had 16 years to simplify the process, so a technical writer can just write, but instead they have to be extremely technical to just get to that point where they could possibly write. Also, those tools do not have cloud or collaboration built in. The closest, there's one out there that is sort of pseudo-cloud-based, but it requires much of the same. You have to download content locally and have an editor.
Can you say names with those tools?
Yeah, so there's a tool that's, I believe it's built in Rochester, New York, where my company is. It is called EasyDITA, and it's the closest thing we've found to a cloud-based DITA, but the editor is not super powerful. It didn't meet our needs, so we were still downloading content and working with it in Oxygen. Which was just, it just doesn't work. And then commenting is really terrible there too. And part of the basis of DITA, which is a good concept, is when you're writing, you just write basic text. And then you push it, you transition it to different types of formats, which is beautiful in a concept. But when it comes to actually reviewing that content and having other people review it, that's pretty terrible, because they don't get the context. And they don't get, sometimes they can't even see how it's going to be constructed in the final view. So that it makes collaboration nearly impossible. So fiddling with XML. So I mentioned my bulleted list. I'm at bullet 3, and something has gone wrong, and I jump in there, and it turns out somehow the formatting is messed up. I don't know if I copied and pasted something into the editor from somewhere else, and it brought something with it, or whatever happened. XML is now messed up, so I need to understand the concepts of XML to go in and fix that and switch back to authoring a view, and then it has to sort of re-render the page. And well, that fixed that problem, but now my image is messed up for some reason, so I have to jump in there. That is, I think I spent as much time fiddling with XML as I did technical writing, which means we were dreadfully behind in all of our authoring, sometimes weeks, sometimes months behind development because of that kind of thing. So when it came to the review process, because we're working with Git, which is the best way to version DITA content, you have to commit your branch. You have to then run a custom-built job, which takes that content and pushed it out to an HTML site. Like I said, one of the difficulties with Git is, or with DITA is is it's hard to review in the right context. So because I knew we were publishing to our help site, we would run this job to build a sort of a demo help site that our reviewers could look at, which was very helpful to understand that context. But then they had to review in a help site, which reviewing in an HTML site isn't great because you can't comment on it, right? You're looking at a website. So what review typically looked like was you have to do all the stuff to commit and then run the job and hope the build didn't break. And then you get comments back. And comments come in the form of an accompanying Google Doc that says, go to paragraph 3, sentence 2, and you missed a comma. And now, if you will, peruse down to this image that is totally broken because the build broke. Right? That's how review looked. So my reviewers hated me so much. They hated doing the review. It took hours and hours of developer time and my product owner's time, who he also did a review for the customer. Reviews, it just took forever. And because you're working with XML and because it's so easy to break the XML, even in these editors, we had to have our build engineer review the writing to make sure that it meets our XML standards and something that is beyond my understanding in XML is not messed up, which often it was. So then you'd have to manually correct that in the branch. So then when it came to publishing, because we're managing in Git, which is the best way to manage DITA content, you have to then merge the branches, which, for those of you who don't work with Git, imagine you have folders on your desktop that are full of text files, and all those text files make up the different things you've written about. So then you want to put those all together, right? Because you had different writers write different things, or even you wrote different things about different topics. And now you need to bring it all together so you can make your new version that represents what you've written about. So what happens are these beautiful things called conflicts, which is where two people may have changed the same document, or maybe you change the same document in two of those different versions of it, and it just presents you with a view and it says, hey, there's two changes. What would you like to keep and what would you not like to keep? Which is very difficult when you wrote it a month ago and you're looking at the two sentences and you're trying to figure out which is right. I don't even remember anymore. And then also, you also will find sometimes when you merge those branches, if you didn't write some of the content, or even sometimes it would just happen, you would just lose stuff. You would go to you would review the page and you would say, where's my paragraph? Where's my diagram? They're completely gone. And so then you would have to create additional branches to correct your branch and then merge that branch into your branch, and then you can send that branch out to the build, right? So climbing branches is a lot more fun than merging them. So then we would have to run two more custom built automated jobs, and I want to stress they were custom built just because that is a lot of time that was spent there, and then maintenance time was sort of ongoing because things break, things change, and so we had to run two different automated jobs. One published a certain version and a certain variation to our generally available help site for all of our customers, and then some of our customers are on what we call our preview channel, and they get custom content on the newest, latest, and greatest software that's only available to a select group. So had to publish different things to different places, so I had to have two custom jobs for that. So this was a huge headache for me, and I was really curious, was it just me, right? Was it just NimbleUser? Were we just coming across these problems? I wanted to know that, sort of in earnest. So it didn't take me long to find a study by Content Wrangler. They did in 2017, and they asked their users, anyone who partook in the survey, how many of you do you feel you're having problems with DITA, right? And they just gave a certain percentage. I expected, maybe 15%. It actually turns out it's 62% of people using DITA express having problems with it. We're talking about a 16-year-old format with multiple different editors from multiple different publishers, and yet 62% of the entire market surveyed say they are having problems with DITA. I feel like something is wrong here, right? But I'm feeling I'm part of that 62%. There's a lot of us, right? There's a lot of us. If you look at a survey done by Oxygen, the people that make the Oxygen editor, they asked, what's your biggest frustration with DITA, right? Biggest frustration is high level of entry. After 16 years, nothing has become simplified. It's still very, very difficult. In fact, if you go back to that Content Wrangler study, they had 10 of the biggest challenges. What are the 10 biggest challenges you face? Here's 5 of the ones that really were, they sort of spoke to me. So making DITA do what it needs to do, right? I just want it to do what it needs to do, what it's supposed to do, and I can't do it. Lack of training. It's very hard to train people to use DITA, and it's very, very hard to train them to use the DITA editors. So just the training aspect is incredibly difficult for people. A lot of people don't understand how the software works. And by the software, we're talking about editors here. People just can't figure them out because they're not approachable. And because of all of this, it's hard to find skilled employees, right? If you're an individual and you live and breathe DITA and you absolutely love these editors and you write love notes in them because that's how much you love authoring in DITA and in one of these editors, you are a very rare person. And so it's very hard to find those people. And then finally, and this was perhaps the hardest to see, it's just hard for people still don't understand how to author DITA content, right? It's because the tools are so difficult, and you get distracted from how should this even be structured? How should this actually be architected so the information makes sense? People don't even know how to create the content within the standard, or at least 62% of people. So, just more than half the market. So with that kind of shared frustration, I recognized there was a need to change, right? The concepts of DITA, still solid, still great, but the tools were just not working for us. And we needed time, right? We're trying to get a product out to market. I have my development team moving toward a full 2-sprint cycle where we're releasing code every 2 weeks out to our preview customers. And yet I'm lagging behind. I'm a month behind on some of this documentation because I'm fighting with tools. Or I can't get people to review because they hate it so much, right? So I knew it was time to switch, but I didn't know what to switch to, right? Real technical writers use DITA. That's what I was told. But I tried something else. So I found this thing called Confluence. And so Confluence changed everything. Confluence has an editor that is approachable. And then I found a plugin, or excuse me, an app for Confluence called Scroll Versions. And with Scroll Versions, you can do all the things that technical writers do. So as an example here, I'm just working with the editor. One of the great things is it is like a real editor that people use every day. I can just go in and write the text I need to write. I can add headings. I can add bullets without having to check to see if the XML for the bullets is screwed up. It's a dream. You'll also see there's some little boxes here and there. Those are called macros, and that's a way of adding dynamic content in Confluence. That is incredibly powerful. I'm not going to get into what those all are because there's so much there, but that's how you include content. That's how you reuse content. That's also how you can bring in other dynamic things right into the page. So if you want to have a dynamic chart added to your documentation, you can add that. Rather than hiring a consulting firm to code some custom HTML solution for you, you just drop that into your page. It's a lot easier. So that made authoring approachable. I had a situation where we had 3 or 4 of our consulting team who became available to work on our help documentation. And so in 4 hours, I was able to train them how to write in Confluence, as well as what are our writing standards, what is our style, what's our tone, how do we do grammar, everything in 4 hours of time. And so in less than a day's time, I expanded my team by 4 people. It was incredible because they could approach the editor. So when it came to review, remember all those people that kind of hated me, right? Well, they really, really like review in Confluence because review in Confluence is the way review ought to be. You just select the thing that is an issue and you make a comment, and you can call out the person that wrote it and say, hey Matt, I don't like the way this started. I don't think this matches our standards. Another great thing is sometimes there will be validations by my product owner who he's representing the customer, and he'll ask one of the engineers who worked on this, and he'll say, is this technically true? It should be, because they already technically, they reviewed it. But if not, right, that's a way to catch those things. And so this reduced review, I wish I had numbers. The developers stopped tracking the review time in Jira because they were sick of logging all the time. So I don't have exact numbers for you, but I know the particular feature, it took 2 weeks of back and forth between a developer and a tech writer to write that in DITA. And now our average review time for technical reviews of tickets is between 5 to 10 minutes. And that goes the same for the peer review that my product owner does. So that was perhaps the most drastic change in our process. And then when it comes to making the corrections, rather than having that Word doc over here that I have to correct, I just look at the comments in Confluence and I make the changes in the exact same context the comments were made. So finally, when it comes to publishing, this is where Scroll Versions really, really shines. I mean, it's great throughout the whole process, but this is where it just changed my life. So when it comes to publishing, instead of all those branches and merging and all that garbage, I have all my versions right in the top right-hand corner, and I can say, hey, I want to publish the Spring 18 version 3 right there. I've selected my version in Confluence, and I'm going to publish that. I'm going to let my build engineer enjoy his vacation, and I'm going to publish it myself with a couple of button clicks rather than having him run a job. And one of the great things is I'm going to publish this live to my production help site during normal business hours because it will not interrupt the work that people are doing at all. So that's the simplicity of publishing. And what that allowed us to do is, rather than spending an entire day trying to fix the build, I publish things after every sprint. So we do 2-week sprints. I stroll into work on Monday and hit a couple buttons and publish that live content out when the developers are pushing the live code out to our customers. In fact, sometimes I even beat them to it, and I publish my technical content, a little bit before they publish the code. So our customers always have the most recent content with the most recent version of software, which is incredible. There are some needs that some people have. Perhaps you can't just deliver your new versions that quickly, right? You're not on a software as a service solution. Maybe you work in manufacturing, so you're delivering in PDFs or something. You can publish to PDF. You can publish to any format you can think of. And also, you can display on a website the different versions of your content that you have. So if someone is on 2.0, you don't just wipe that off with 3.0. People can pick whatever version they want to read. And so this approach, Confluence with Scroll Versions, changed everything. And one of the beauties is that it is incredibly scalable. So I mentioned I had a situation where I went from 1 technical writer to 4, right, in 4 hours. That was incredibly simple because Confluence, Scroll Versions is built on Confluence, and Confluence is built on an incredible platform that allows for collaboration. I believe that one of the largest Confluence instances is 400,000 people. So if you have 400,000, 280,000. I get mixed up when I'm working with numbers that big. So if you have 280,000 technical writers and reviewers, which you probably don't, that's like a whole country writing and reviewing technical documentation. It can handle that, right? You can have that many people in there doing that. Also, because it's so approachable, I can scale it across teams. So my company is starting to look at having multiple development teams, interdisciplinary teams. I can train anyone in 4 hours to use this system and meet all of our standards and publish their content and manage their own variants and their own versions of that content, as well as using another K15T app eventually when we go international, also manage translation and publish those translations as well. One of the things we're looking at right now is, do we want to have a separate help site behind a login for our partners and publish a variant of our content with additional detail that only partners would want to know. So that's one of the new ways that we're going to be scaling with this that I'm really excited about. It's just great to know that the platform is all there and I can do whatever I want to do. So where does that put us as a company, being there? Well, we've achieved something that is known in the industry as DocOps. Who's familiar with DocOps? All right. I always say it sounds like a bad supervillain, right? But DocOps actually means it's sort of a fancy way of describing agile documentation. If you're familiar with the agile process, it was put together by development teams. And it's a fantastic way of doing things, but they don't really describe how documentation ought to be done in that environment. And so DocOps is sort of the technical writing industry's way of naming how agile documentation happens. And so what that means is rather than my engineers working on something and then putting it out and then it goes through QA and then I write about it, I write about things as they're coded. In fact, sometimes I write about things before they're coded. That's called writing fiction. It's where I look at a ticket that a developer is working on and I say, oh, they're going to add this. And sometimes we even write our test plan beforehand, which is how it should be done. Often we don't quite do that, but I can look at the test plan and say, this is what the user ought to be able to do. And here's the user story. And so I know exactly what is going to be put out here, and so I write about it before it even happens. Sometimes you have to make adjustments, right? If a developer thought we needed to, originally we were going to do a radio buttons, and it turns out we did a drop-down list. Make some modifications there. But it means I can work in step with my team. And also, another part of Agile that is fantastic is you have a daily stand-up, which is a daily meeting, a very short one, where you review the work that's being done. So we all check in, we say, this is what I worked on, this is what I'm going to work on, here are any problems I'm having, and then we've started to actually show our work during those times afterward. And so every day I see small bits of progress as they're made. So I can physically see something and say, oh, you've added a dropdown, you've added this experience, you've added this a profile or whatever the case may be, and I go to my desk and I write about it. Right? That's DocOps. And what that really means is at the end of our sprint, we can publish our code and we can publish our content. And our customers get the best quality code and the best quality content at the exact same time. It means we're always ready for release. So if we need to, hopefully this never happens, but if we need to publish halfway through a sprint, we can do that, right? We can do that because we live the DocOps life. And it's constantly changing. I'm not going to say we figured it out, but we're pretty close. We're pretty close. And once you've tasted it, you'll never go back. You'll never try anything else. It is fantastic. So I've gone from being 4 weeks behind to being up to the minute. And that's what DocOps is about, and that's what Confluence and Scroll Versions has enabled for my team. So in summary, we dumped DITA. And I was really, really scared, but it's the best choice I've ever made. It probably changed the course of my career, I would say, and it certainly made me happier at home as well, because I didn't come home frustrated after banging my head against some XML. I love walking with a wiki. Confluence is absolutely fantastic. I'm able to do things without the need of a build engineer that I never thought we would ever be able to do. My team loves it because I'm not wasting their time on review. They're just able to get in, get their work done, and get out. And we have the highest quality content we have ever had. And finally, we're able to do DocOps. We are living in an agile documentation world, which means we can review up-to-date, up-to-the-minute documentation, and I'm able to collaborate with my developers like I never have before. And that has changed everything for our team.